Now I'm going to address the power laws as they apply in level 2. For the most part they're the same as level 1, except they apply 2 or 3 of them at the same time to get much more complicated expressions. In the end though, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take the multiple powers, in this case x is both squared and then cubed, and combine them so that there is only one power for each variable. The following meanings of exponents need to be automatic. Very important that you learn these off by heart as soon as possible. X squared means x times x, and hopefully you know that, and x to the power of 1 is x. X to the power of half is the square root of x, and you need to be able to move between those two. To know square root is a half, and the half is the square root. Now, it's not half of x, it's the square root of x. And x to the power of 0 is not 0, it's 1. Any number to the power of 0 is 1. And now the ones that cause the most trouble. If the power is negative, it means 1 over the positive of that number. So x to the minus 1 is not a negative number, it means 1 over x. Very important. X to the minus 1 is not a negative number, it means 1 over x. And x to the minus 2 means 1 over x to the 2. And then we put those meanings together using these rules of exponents. When we multiply two terms, we add their exponents, and we've been doing that for years. X squared times x cubed is x to the power of 5. And when we divide them, we subtract them. Although we also have to remember that we do it by cancellation. So in this case, these two cancel 2 of those out, and we get 1 over x squared. But that is also x to the 2 minus 4 is minus 2. And there we have what x to the minus 2 means, 1 over x to the 2. Either of those answers is satisfactory in the exams. X to the a bracketed b means we multiply a by b. So x squared all to the power of 5 is x to the 10, 2 times 5. And the square root of a number is half of that power. So x to the power of 6 square rooted is x to the power of 3, and that's because x to the 3 times x to the 3 is x to the 6. And we use each of those rules in turn, remembering that BEDMAS still applies at all times in maths, and that includes in algebra, and that square roots and fractions are effectively bracketed. So in this case, the square root applies to all of the x squared times x8, because the bar goes all the way along, so that part must be done first. Then we halve it to get x5. And that rule of the applying the power outside to multiply in also applies when you have multiple terms in the brackets. So we have the c out here applies to both the y to the b and the x to the a. X to the a c, y to the b c. And we do that with numbers. We have to be careful. 5 is not times 3, it's 5 to the power of 3. 5 to the power of 3 is 125. 5 times 5 times 5, and the x cubed stays as x cubed. And that applies regardless of what type of numbers you have. So if you have a number, quite an odd number, 1.5, and it's outside the brackets, then a 16 is to the 1.5, and the y squared is to the 1.5. So we say 16 to the 1.5, and we stick that in our calculators, and we discover it is 64. And the 2 times 1.5 is 3. Same as the 9 above, just with slightly awkwarder numbers. But we can still stick awkward numbers into our calculator or multiply them just as we did up here. And it's worth remembering that multiple bracketed almost as a separate rule. The power outside applies to each of the variables inside. And it applies throughout the brackets, including ones with fractions. So when we are asked to cube that particular term, the cubed applies top and bottom. So the y is cubed and the x squared is cubed, and the squared cubed is 6. And remembering that a square root is in fact a power, it's all to the power of a half, that square root applies to each term, and we can square root each term. We have each of those terms square rooted, and they are halved. Now recall, if one of these was a number, if this was 16, then it would be the square root of 16, which would be 4. We square root the number, we halve the power. And finally, it's always worth getting rid of negative signs first. And we do that by inversing any fractions. So when we have that, it's to the minus 3, the first step is to do this, which is to turn that to positive 3 and inverse the fraction. Now we can go on and cube the x, cube the y squared. These are the ones they really like, the power of negative a half. So we'll do just what I said, we'll get rid of the negative first. Remember, the half is a square root, and the negative flips the contents upside down. So we are square rooting y squared over x4, and the square root applies to each part individually. Y squared and x4 individually square rooted, and that means halving the powers.